the shelter that someone else maintained. I had been volunteering as a trail maintainer in Great Smoky Mountains National Park for nearly 4 years when I first encountered that shelter. Most of my work involved repairing backcountry structures, clearing fallen branches, and fixing eroded trails. I usually enjoyed the solitude. Being alone in the forest gave me time to think and breathe away from the noise of the world. That autumn morning was assigned to a remote shelter tucked deep along a rarely used ridge trail. The directions were straightforward, but the ranger had added a quiet warning. It hasn't seen maintenance in years. I packed my usual gear, tools, spare wood, food, and water, and set out early, eager for a long day of hiking in the crisp mountain air. The trailhead started at a narrow, winding forest road. Fog hung low over the trees, making the pines look like they were floating in a gray sea. My boots crunched over damp leaves as I began the long ascent. The smell of wet soil, moss, and fallen leaves filled the air. Birds chirped occasionally, and a distant woodpecker drummed somewhere further up the ridge. Everything seemed calm, perfectly normal, until I reached the side path leading to the shelter. It was narrower, overgrown, and darker than the main trail, but I welcomed the challenge. The further I walked, the heavier the forest felt. Trees crowded the narrow path, their branches forming tunnels of shadow overhead. Thick fog swirled around my ankles as I stepped over roots and rocks, and the quiet made every snap of a twig echo. I paused frequently to catch my breath, glancing back down the trail. No one was behind me, of course, but the fog made it feel like someone or something could be following. My pack felt heavier than usual, even though I had carried it hundreds of miles before. Something about the stillness of that forest was different, almost expectant, as if it had been waiting for me. After nearly 3 hours of hiking, I arrived at the clearing where the shelter stood. At first glance, it seemed normal, but details didn't fit. The roof was straight and solid, the wood siding cared for, and the platform free of debris. That wasn't unusual for a maintained shelter, but the ranger's record showed no one had been here for years. I dropped my pack and walked around, inspecting the ground. It had been swept clean, and even the fire pit was arranged neatly, with stones stacked and ash removed. Someone had clearly been here, but who and why remained a mystery. I climbed onto the platform to inspect the interior. Sleeping surface was swept free of leaves, pine needles, and other debris that normally accumulate. Against one wall, a small stack of split firewood was carefully arranged under the overhang. Whoever had prepared it had thought about the next visitor, someone who might come and need a fire. I ran my hand over the smooth wood, wondering who had carried it deep into the backcountry. Hauling supplies this far is hard work, and I couldn't imagine a random hiker doing it without leaving some sign. I unpacked my tools, ready to do the inspection and repairs, but everything seemed in excellent condition. The boards on the roof were intact, the supports solid, and the steps leading to the platform were newer than the rest. Tapping the wood with my hammer, it sounded almost hollow, as if freshly repaired. I checked for signs of animals, but the floor was clean. Normally, unattended shelters show wear from raccoons or deer, but this one had been meticulously maintained. There was no record of any official maintenance, yet it looked like someone had been very deliberate. As the afternoon fog thickened, I decided to stay the night. Hiking back in darkness along the overgrown trail would have been risky. I set up my small stove for dinner and watched the mist curl around the trees. It gave the forest an unreal, dreamlike quality. Even the usual creaks and groans of the forest seemed quieter, almost hesitant, as if waiting. I tried to shake the uneasy feeling, telling myself it was just the unfamiliar shadows. Hours passed, and I settled into my sleeping bag on the platform. That's when I first heard it. A slow, soft tapping against the shelter wall. At first I told myself it was just the wind moving a branch, but the forest was still. The tapping had a rhythm, deliberate, stopping briefly when I paused, then resuming. My pulse quickened. I grabbed my headlamp and scanned the outside, but the fog was thick. The silence that followed was heavier than the mist itself, pressing in on me from all sides. I stayed awake for hours after that first sound. Each time I drifted off, the tapping returned, sometimes from a different section of the wall. I checked the perimeter carefully, stepping into the fog with my light, but no footprints appeared. Even the firewood pile seemed untouched since my inspection hours ago. It was as if someone had been there but vanished completely, leaving the shelter prepared for me alone. The thought sent chills down my spine, but I tried to reason it away. Maybe a hiker had been discreet and gone before nightfall. Around midnight, the tapping stopped, replaced by a slow scraping along the roof. I froze, straining my ears. The sound was deliberate, unlike any animal I had heard in the backcountry. I shined the lamp upward, catching glimpses of mist rolling across the shingles, but nothing moved. My mind raced through possibilities. Raccoon, wind, branch, but none fit. The rhythm and timing suggested awareness, not instinct. Whoever or whatever was responsible seemed to move with intention, adjusting when I shifted or glanced. I stayed upright for hours, watching the fog swirl. Every now and then, I thought I heard movement beyond the clearing, soft footfalls or rustling leaves, but the forest remained empty. The sense of being observed grew heavier, and I kept the flashlight on. The wood felt unnaturally solid beneath my hands, the air cold and thick. Somewhere deep in the mountains, it felt as if someone else had been waiting for me, watching me without showing themselves. Dawn finally broke with a pale gray light over the ridge. Fog had thinned slightly, and forest sounds returned. Birds, a running creek, squirrels chattering somewhere unseen. Standing outside the shelter, I could see the trees clearly. The clearing was empty, neat, and orderly, exactly as I found it. I walked slowly around the shelter, examining steps, firewood, and platform boards, all exactly as I had left them. Whoever repaired and maintained the place remained a mystery. I made breakfast while thinking about the night. My instincts told me the shelter had been prepared intentionally for someone's arrival, yet no one was here and no record existed of recent work. The experience felt like stepping into someone else's world, meticulously organized and completely empty. Even as I ate, the tension lingered, hanging in the foggy morning air. I couldn't shake the memory of the tapping and scraping, though rational explanation seemed impossible. After packing my gear, I took one last walk around the clearing. The fog had lifted, revealing leaves and a faint trail leading deeper into the forest. Nothing unusual appeared, but the memory of the night stayed with me. Every small forest sound drew my attention, making me hyper-aware of each movement. I couldn't explain the meticulous condition of the shelter or the noises I heard. Even rational thoughts faltered in the heavy stillness of the Smokies. By mid-morning, I began the long hike back down the ridge. Each step on the trail felt heavier, burdened by the mystery I couldn't solve. I glanced back at the clearing, half expecting to see someone or something watching me leave, and nothing appeared. The shelter remained silent, pristine, and empty, as if the forest had swallowed any evidence of its caretaker. Even after reaching the main road and distant human sounds, the memory of that foggy ridge stayed with me. I told myself it had to be a deer moving parallel to the trail, but the longer I listened, the more that explanation felt weak. Deer do not match human pace with such exact rhythm, and they certainly do not pause precisely when a person pauses. Yet every time I slowed or stopped, the steps adjusted within a second or two, never perfectly instant, but always close enough to suggest awareness rather than instinct. My pulse quickened, and the forest around me seemed impossibly still, as if holding its breath. I gripped my walking stick tighter and strained to see through the dim fog, every shadow on the trail suddenly sharper than it had any right to be. I decided to step off the trail and crouch behind a large fallen log, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was following. The fog wrapped itself around me, dampening the world into muted shades of gray. My ears were painfully alert to every subtle sound, a twig snapping, leaves rustling, my own breathing echoing in the empty forest. The footsteps continued, deliberate and slow, moving alongside the trail but never veering closer or further away. It was the uncanny timing that terrified me the most. Someone or something was consciously tracking my pace, aware of my position even in the fog. I thought about calling out, hoping a human voice might reveal a lost hiker or a fellow trail maintainer. My throat tightened, and my voice sounded small and fragile when I finally whispered a greeting into the mist. The footsteps stopped instantly. A strange, heavy silence filled the clearing around me, as if the entire forest had pressed closer to listen. I waited, frozen, feeling the weight of every tree and rock around me. Seconds dragged into minutes, the silence almost unbearable, before the sound started again, this time fading slightly as it receded into the fog. I forced myself to stand and move forward, hugging the trail's edge and keeping my head low. Each step felt measured, as if the earth itself were guiding me, matching the rhythm of the phantom following. The fog began to thin slightly, revealing glimpses of moss-covered boulders and twisted roots that had to be navigated carefully. My heart thumped painfully against my ribs, and I imagined what could be moving so precisely alongside me. A bear. Unlikely, given the careful timing. Human. Even less likely considering the shelter was remote, and no one had been reported on this trail for months. Hours seemed to pass in minutes as I continued along the trail. Every now and then, I would glance behind, catching only the fog and dark silhouettes of trees. The forest felt alive in a way it never had before, watching me, waiting. I remembered my map and compass, but both felt useless in the oppressive fog. I tried to focus on the simple task of moving forward, step by step, but the feeling of being followed was relentless. Even the faintest sound of the wind through the pines sounded like whispered voices, deliberate and probing. At one point, I stumbled over a root and cursed under my breath. The footsteps paused immediately, mirroring my sudden stillness. I froze, holding my breath, the hairs on my neck standing upright. After a few heartbeats, the sound resumed, matching my pace again. That was when I realized this wasn't an animal or random coincidence. The entity, whatever it was, possessed an intelligence, an awareness of my movements that made every instinct scream danger. I gripped my stick like a weapon, though I knew it wouldn't help against something unseen and calculating. I tried to pick up the pace, hoping to lose it along a switchback that wound steeply down the ridge. My legs burned, lungs aching, but the sound stayed behind me, unwavering. It was as if the fog itself had gained form, trailing me without faltering. I glanced around desperately, looking for a hiding place, a boulder, anything to shield me. Every option felt inadequate. The trees and fog seemed endless, a labyrinth designed to keep me trapped. Panic began to claw at the edges of my mind. I had been in the backcountry countless times, but never had I felt this utterly helpless. Eventually, I reached a small creek, cutting across the trail. I crouched beside it, water gurgling quietly as I tried to think clearly. The footsteps slowed slightly as they crossed the shallow water, but never disappeared. Something about the sound chilled me deeper than the fog or cold ever could. It was deliberate, patient, waiting for me to make a mistake. I wanted to turn, to run back the way I had come, but I knew the ridge trail behind me offered no cover and nothing to hide behind. I was forced to keep moving forward, every step calculated and slow. By late morning, the fog began to lift, revealing glimpses of the surrounding mountains. Sunlight touched the ridges, scattering patches of gold and brown across the forest floor. Despite the light, the presence behind me never fully vanished. The forest looked ordinary, calm, even beautiful. Yet I couldn't shake the sensation that I was still being watched, followed by eyes I could not see. Every shadow, every hollow between trees, seemed to pulse with hidden life. My usual confidence as a hiker had dissolved entirely, leaving only primal awareness. Survive, move, don't falter. I reached a small campsite along the trail, evidence of hikers from weeks prior. The clearing offered temporary comfort. Human traces and fire rings suggested safety. I paused to drink water and adjust my pack, scanning the tree line for movement. Nothing appeared. The sense of intelligence behind the footsteps persisted, but at least now I had room to maneuver, and the open space allowed me to spot anyone or anything that might be lingering. The forest seemed to hold its breath around me as I rested briefly, wary of every sound. Moving on, I began to descend into a denser section of the forest. Sunlight struggled to pierce the thick canopy, shadows stretching like hands across the trail. Each step required more effort as roots and rocks crowded the path, forcing careful navigation. Yet through it all, the rhythmic steps continued, keeping pace just beyond my vision. I realized that even in open spaces, I could not shake it. The entity did not need to be seen to exert its presence. It had become a weight pressing against my mind as much as the pack on my back. Finally, I glimpsed a familiar marker, a sign indicating the junction with a larger trail that would lead me back toward the trailhead. Relief surged through me. I quickened my pace, and for the first time the footsteps seemed to hesitate. The rhythm faltered, uneven for just a moment, then resumed once I slowed at the junction. I didn't stop. My mind was fixed on the main trail. every nerve straining for the moment when I could be free of the ridge and the fog that had concealed whatever had followed me. As I emerged onto the main trail, the forest around me returned to its usual sounds: rustling leaves, distant birdsong, the faint rush of a creek somewhere below. The footsteps vanished completely, as if they had never existed. Looked back at the ridge, mist curling gently over the trees, and tried to reconcile what had happened. Everything appeared normal again, almost mundane, yet I could not convince myself that I had imagined it. The shelter, the fog, and the rhythmic pursuit remained etched into my memory. By the time I reached the parking area and saw signs of civilization cars, voices, and other hikers, I felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief. The ridge trail and that shelter seemed like a different world altogether, one that existed outside the normal rules of time and space. I told the rangers about the shelter, about the meticulously maintained condition, and the strange tapping and footsteps, but they could offer no explanation. According to their records, no one had been there in years, and certainly no one had been following me along the trail. Even now, years later, I remember that ridge clearly. The shelter still stands on the map, inviting hikers to rest, yet the fog and the echo of those footsteps linger in my mind. I never discovered who or what maintained the place, nor did I find any signs of a human presence on that night. It remains one of the strangest experiences I've had in the backcountry, a perfect mix of solitude, skill, and something I can't explain. Every time I think of it, I feel that same quiet weight of the forest watching, waiting, keeping its secrets in the Smokies.